Hello and welcome to my channel. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for returning. It's great to have you back. And if you're a first-time viewer, do stick around. So, what are we talking about today? I'm glad you asked me. We are looking at a book which is hot off my recent TBR video. And if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend you do. It has been described as a game changer and a life changer, described that way by myself. And I've got no reason to think that I'm wrong. Okay, so we're looking at Underworld London, Crime and Punishment in the Capital City by Catherine Arnold. Catherine, I was holding that a bit long there, I don't know why. Catherine Arnold's a really, really good author. I've read another one of her books. It's called Necropolis. It's about the history of cemeteries in London. She's a very, very good author, and I plan to read a few more of her books. She's got a really, really great style of writing. And I know I say this every time whenever I really like a book that's factual, but this book really does read like a novel. It's really, really engaging. So basically, as the title might describe, it's talking about crime and punishment throughout the centuries in London. Now, it has to be said that London, as you can tell from this book, London hasn't always been the crime-free utopia that it is today. In fact, criminality used to be quite common in London. And what Catherine Arnold does is she takes us on a journey through time and space. When I say space, she starts off at a particular point in London and then travels through the city, basically taking in all of the landmarks which are relevant to the crime and punishment history of the city. So she starts at Tyburn, and then she also talks about, in no particular order, the Tower of London, Smithfield, Newgate, the site of Newgate Prison, the Old Bailey, and so on. So she takes a geographical trip through London, as she also takes us century by century from medieval times to the present day, or to the 20th century anyway. And along the way, she illustrates various notorious characters from each period. And she talks notorious characters from both sides. So you've got, on the criminal side, famous names like Jack Sheppard, Dick Turpin, who was a highwayman, the fictional Fagin, who was actually, he was essentially a fictionalized version of the real kind of people who used to do that kind of thing. That is a terrible description. Oh, sorry. And also to more modern times like the Kray Twins, who I'm going to do a video about fairly soon. So I bet you can't wait for that. Put that in your diary. And she goes into great detail about the kind of punishments that were meted out for various crimes. She talks about the bloody code, which existed for some hundreds of years in Britain, which essentially made it a capital offence to do pretty much anything. If you stole something, you were sentenced to death. It didn't matter how trivial the thing was. If you went out of your house, you were sentenced to death. If you existed, you were sentenced to death. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but the bloody code incorporated a tremendous number of crimes which were punishable by death. And when you read about it today, it's ridiculous, the things that they would execute people for. She also talks about. She also goes into the morality of the death penalty. Whether it should exist or not. She talks about many, many notorious cases throughout history of individuals who were sentenced to death. And she also talks about various notorious cases such as Ruth Ellis or Derek Bentley in the 20th century, individuals who were executed who probably shouldn't have been, people against whom the case was quite flimsy, to say the least. So it's a very, very interesting book. It's very, very all-encompassing. It encompasses many, many different kinds of crimes. I mean, crime is crime, obviously, but, for example, centuries ago, there were highwaymen. We don't have highwaymen now. We have carjacking. So it just goes to show how things have improved. And it talks about the various forms of death penalty, not death penalty, sorry, a means of execution. She goes into all of the most common ones like hanging, drawing and quartering, burning at the stake, hanging. So she really goes into a great deal of depth in this book about, basically crime in London throughout the centuries and the individuals who stood out in each particular era. If I have one gripe, and it's only a very, very small one, because I'm by no means an expert in this. I know I look like an expert and I sound like an expert, but I'm really, really not. So anyway, rambling again. My gripe would be that there's a on one of the chapters on gangland, more modern day gangland, she talks about the Kray Twins. If you're from England, you'll have heard of the Kray Twins. They're ubiquitous. There are a couple of films about them as well. There was a recent film starring Tom Hardy as both of the Kray Twins called Legend. So even if you're not from the UK, you may well have heard of them. They're the most famous gangsters Britain's ever produced, which is a odd distinction. Like everyone says Al Capone in the USA, everyone knows Al Capone. In England, everyone knows the Kray Twins. They were two brothers, obviously. They were twins, duh. And my gripe is that I think that in this book, I think that she kind of gives them a bit too much credit. She makes it sound like they ruled London. They didn't. They were one gang among various gangs. London was run essentially by in different territories. Different gangs were preeminent. For example, the Kray Twins' principal enemies were the Richardsons, who were based in the south of London. They ran the East End, but they had some interests in one or two clubs, but they didn't run clubs and own and control clubs throughout Soho. They weren't that powerful and they weren't that influential. There's a great deal of mythology about the Krays. Personally speaking, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. I despise gangsters in general, and I really despised kind of the glorification of gangsters. That's not what Catherine Arnold is doing. I'm not accusing her of that at all. I'm just saying I wanted to put the Kray thing into perspective because there's huge mythology about them, and I don't like seeing them getting credit for things that they didn't do. So anyway, that's about it. That's about it for the review. I would highly recommend this book. It's very, very enjoyable. It's very, very readable. And even if you already know a lot about crime in London, crime and punishment in London, there's probably something in here that you won't have come across. And I think that this would also be a good book for anyone researching the topic. Maybe you're doing a thesis about it or something like this. You're studying criminology. If you're studying criminology, I think that this would be a very valuable book to have in your library. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this review. Well, what am I saying? Of course you did. And if you haven't watched my TBR, do go and watch it now before it's too late. Too late for what? Who knows? Anyway, I'm rambling. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.